Good evening, Indiana. Welcome to the Who's Left Podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from an unapologetically leftist perspective. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I am broadcasting from Bloomington. Tonight, we are going to tackle an incredibly fraught topic. Since the Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023, Israel's military campaign in Gaza has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, drawn genocide proceedings at the International Court of Justice, and domestically helped sink Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential campaign as young voters especially punished Democrats in key swing states for their refusal to break with President Biden's Gaza policy. Now, with AIPAC emerging as one of the most contested forces in Democratic primary politics, the question of what Americans can say about Israel and at what cost is being fought over in courtrooms, on campuses, and at the ballot box. Daniel A. Segal is the Gene M. Pitzer Professor Emeritus of Anthropology and Professor Emeritus of History at Pitzer College, one of the Claremont colleges in suburban Los Angeles. He served as president of the American Association of University Professors chapter there and a member of the executive board of California Scholars for Academic Freedom, a past fellow of the Center of Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, and a past secretary of the American Anthropological Association. He has published widely about kinship in Jane Austen, racial discourse and practices in Trinidad, the history and history of several social science disciplines, Jane Goodall in Gombe, and world history. He also served on the coordinating committee of Jewish Voice for Peace Los Angeles and the organizing collective of U.S. academic and cultural boycott of Israel. Now, living in Bloomington, Segal is a member of the coordinating committee for Jewish Voice for Peace Indiana. Tonight, we're going to talk about untangling Zionism from Judaism, the battle over the definition of anti-Semitism, Jewish dissent inside Jewish communities, how to discuss the U.S.-Israel special relationship and Israeli influence in U.S. politics without sounding like an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist, and finally, what a just resolution to the Israel-Palestine conflict would look like. Now, before we get to all that, a real quick ask. This is an independent media project, and we could not have intense discussions like this without your support. We don't paywall content. We don't have advertisers. We don't have billionaire benefactors. Only individuals like you keep this thing going. It is a foundational principle of Who's Left and the Progressive Indiana Network that we refuse to hide valuable information behind paywalls in the middle of a political crisis, even if that's not in our financial best interest. So please, if you find value in this work, go to progressiveindiana.net and subscribe at the paid level. It's only $5 a month. $50 for the whole year to help us build the infrastructure that will pop the right-wing media bubble in this state. And if a paid subscription isn't in the cards for you right now, that's okay. You can still help out by liking and sharing on social media, commenting, leaving reviews, providing feedback, and forwarding articles to your people. You get us when you can. Mostly, we just want you to be here in this community of Hoosiers dedicated to making this state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. Please, join us. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads at who'sleft.us. On Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, it's at Who's Left. You can follow Progressive Indiana Network on most social media sites at the full spelled out name, but on Blue Sky and TikTok, it's PIN Indiana. Please help us grow with a follow wherever you're at. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Now, let us welcome Professor Daniel Segal. Professor, welcome.
Thank you so much, Scott. It is a real pleasure, and I'm really excited and at the opportunity to speak with you about these important topics.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for a real long time. You know, it's these things are hard to talk about, especially as somebody outside of the Jewish community. I don't want to say the wrong things, so I'm glad you're here to sort of help us guide us through this. There's a lot to talk about. So, Zionism in many ways gets treated in American political discourse like almost as a synonym for Judaism itself. To be Jewish is to be a Zionist, and to oppose Israel is to be anti-Semitic. But you are an anthropologist by trade, and you study how these categories can get constructed. Historically, where does Zionism actually come from? And how did a 19th century political movement become fused with an ancient religious and ethnic identity?
Well, let me start by saying that I am a 67-year-old Jewish American, proudly Jewish, and I am proudly anti-Zionist. I feel obligated as a Jew in terms of the ethical teachings passed on to me by my blessed parents. I feel obligated as a scholar, and I feel obligated as a human being to be anti-Zionist. So I want to just start by asserting that I am proudly Jewish and very proudly anti-Zionist and supportive of the Palestinian struggle for freedom and equality. And as you said, it is extraordinary that people conflate and confuse Zionism and Judaism. Judaism is a many thousand-year-old religious faith and tradition. It has changed a lot over that time, but it's been around for thousands of years. Usually people talk about 4,000. Zionism is a political project, and it does not emerge to the very end of the 1700s, and it really is not significant until the end of the 1800s. So how something that is thousands of years old and that is a religion could be confused with something that is very recent on that scale of time, 100 to at most 150, 200 years, and that is about state formation. The Jewish religion is not about state formation. Let me start with a analogy. I am staunchly opposed to white supremacism. I am staunchly opposed to the United States becoming anything like a white supremacist state. And under Donald Trump, we have fears that it is moving in that direction. But the fact that I'm against white supremacism and would do everything I could to block a white supremacist state doesn't mean that I'm anti-white people or that I have prejudice against white. What I dislike are not white people. What I dislike is supremacism. What I dislike isn't white people. It's having a state that would privilege whites over blacks. And we have struggled in the United States to end unsuccessfully, but with some steps in that direction, to end white supremacism as a doctrine of the state. We have the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment, and thanks to the Civil Rights Movement, we eliminated enormous number of laws that treated white people as more than and non-white people as less than. That still occurs in the society, but we have had a struggle against having a white supremacist state. And again, being against a white supremacist state is being against the supremacism and against that being in a state. Judaism is a religion. Jews are a people. Zionism is an ideology or project of making a state that treats Jews as more than and non-Jews as less than. It is a project of treating one ethnic group, the Jews, as superior. It's an ethno-supremacist project. It is trying to create an ethno-supremacist state. And currently, the Israeli state is a Zionist state. It has enormous number of laws that treat Jews as more than and non-Jews as less than. Now, I want to come back to your question. How did that happen? Well, unfortunately, during a period of nation making, and in the 19th century, there was a broad ideology that has its own history that said that states should be set up along the lines of ethnic groups or peoples. And that general philosophy of ethnic or people nationalism was adopted by people who thought they were addressing anti-Semitism. And they sought to respond to the horrible anti-Semitism in Europe at the end of the 1800s and through the 1900s by creating a Jewish ethno-supremacist state. The anti-Semitism they were responding to was real. They grabbed a solution from a much broader ethno-nationalist movement, a movement that tried to make nation states, and it was the worst possible response to anti-Semitism. It came at the expense of denying the rights and harming the lives of Palestinians, and it has proven anything but helpful to the Jews. Israel today is one of the most dangerous places in the world for Jews. It is a terrible idea to deal with hatred by creating a state that treats one group of people better than another group of people. To go back to the analogy, our society that treated non-white people so terribly, and South Africa, where there was apartheid that treated non-white people in South Africa terribly, the solution that we embraced was a solution of universal equal rights, not to try to protect people with state power that they could use to abuse other people.
Yeah.
The proper response to anti-Semitism is to embrace equality and freedom, liberation for all people in solidarity with other people, not to create a state that treats Jews better and non-Jews as worse.
So, I mean, I guess you understand where the sentiment comes from. If you look at Eastern Europe in the late 1800s, the pogroms in Russia, especially, come to mind. So you could see why people would be like, well, these folks don't want us here. We need to find somewhere to be where we can be safe. So I guess you understand the thought, but then like the land that we now think of as Israel and Palestine was at that point part of the Ottoman Empire, right? And there were Jews living in the Ottoman Empire, as I understand, peacefully alongside Muslims and Christians. The Ottoman state was kind of weak, but it was relatively pluralistic, I guess. But then
Yes.
After World War I, the British and the French sort of inherit the Ottoman territory and carve it up. They draw lines on maps without really understanding the contours of the people that live there. They divide up communities. They put folks that maybe shouldn't live next to each other, and folks that should be together get split up because they're outsiders. And then obviously you get to World War II and the Holocaust and the terrible murder of many millions of Jewish people, and you understand the desire to find somewhere safe. But you have to weigh that with like the people. There were people already there. That land wasn't the British and the French's to give away.
Well, you've covered so much ground. Let me try to go back over some of the important points.
Yeah, please.
So the general point is, as a Jew, I think anti-Semitism is real, but I don't want, nor can I achieve protection at the expense of somebody else. It doesn't make me safe to have the power to steal somebody else's land. In this country, it really doesn't make white people safe to have hyper-policing of brown and black communities. White people, scared, sometimes make that confusion and support hyper-policing. But I haven't seen that it makes white people safe. You know what's going to make white people safe? Having a society that is just and provides an opportunity for a dignified life for everybody. And the recourse to deal with your fears by grabbing power and abusing other people is a terrible impulse. And that was a very similar impulse behind Zionism. Allow me to digress maybe and tell a family story. It's a story
Please.
about my grandfather, who lived in that part of Eastern Europe where there were so many pogroms, the area known as the Pale of Settlement. And, it's where it is today. It's on the border of Russia and Poland, but that's where Jews were supposed to live, and my grandfather lived. It was in 1906, we think, that as a 5-year-old, he was walking to school and a pogrom came through town, and a brick or a rock, I wasn't there, I've learned this from my grandfather, may his memory be for a blessing, and it hit him. And it hit him behind, actually, this ear, the right ear, and I could feel the scar from that, which he got at 5, when he died in his 90s. His mother, my great-grandmother, who was a wonderful woman, had the correct analysis. Let's get the hell out of here. Now, I knew her. She was a wonderful woman. I never thought to ask her, how did she end up in Brooklyn? She might have very easily, she was just trying to get anywhere where they weren't going to throw bricks at her 5-year-old son, right? She got on a boat. Maybe she knew it was going to Brooklyn. Maybe she didn't. Maybe if she'd waited and taken a boat another day, she would have gone to Palestine. All power to her, whether she went to Brooklyn or Palestine. People who are fleeing oppression should be welcomed anywhere and everywhere. Right now, anybody, we have a closed border blocking people who are fleeing oppression. We should be welcoming them. But if you are drowning in a sea of oppression and you find a lifeboat or a safe harbor to pull yourself up, nobody should turn you back the way Trump does. Nobody in Brooklyn should have turned my grandfather back. Nobody in Palestine should have turned him back if he'd ended up there. But you don't when you pull yourself up onto a safe harbor. Go to the people who are there before you and throw them into the sea of oppression. And that is what Zionism has done to the Palestinian people. And it is an unpardonable sin, and it is unpardonably a degradation and a betrayal of Jewish ethics. The movement to Palestine was no better or worse than the movement to Brooklyn. Unfortunately, ordinary people went because they were fleeing oppression. Sometimes they tried very hard to live as good neighbors with the Arab population there, the Palestinian Arab population that was there. Most of those Palestinian Arabs were Muslim. A sizable minority were Christian, and a small minority were Jewish Palestinian Arabs. Unfortunately, there were Zionist leaders who thought that the best thing to do was not to encourage them to live as decent people with their neighbors, but to steal the land by hook or by crook from the existing Palestinian population and push them away. Buy up land, push them away. And in 1948, that involved massacres and ethnic cleansing, again in 1967. So it is not the fleeing of oppression that anybody criticizes, nor is it people seeking safe harbor wherever they could. But, if you got to the United States and you joined the, white supremacism in treating brown and black people in the city terribly, that would have also been a terrible thing to do. You can flee oppression and enter a new society, but you should treat everybody there as you want to be treated, with freedom and equality. Unfortunately, there were Zionist leaders who pulled the people fleeing oppression into this project of building a Jewish ethno-supremacist state. It involved land theft. It involved ethnic cleansing. Most recently, it has involved genocide.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that word, because I think, coming up, I always was a, geography and history person. Those were the things I studied. And even in my naivete, I recognized like a couple things, after World War II, and you sort of see the demise of the British Empire and the French, what was left of their empire as well, and their colonial holdings, and the people that lived in those places, they got their independence, self-determination. And the Palestinian folks did not. They appeared, and correct me if I'm wrong, to just get a new colonizer. But then also you mentioned genocide, and I see the parallels with what happened in this country. And you think of these lovely whitewash stories we're told about the Pilgrims fleeing religious persecution in their European homes, coming over here and taking over the land from the people that were already there. And I see the parallels, like looking at Israel and the genocide there and driving the native folks off their land. I've seen this story before.
Yeah. I mean, that parallel is profound. There's what you might call a time difference, right? White settler colonialism killed, any killing is wrong, but just large numbers of Native Americans as part of the settler colony of the United States through the 1800s. It took place then. It was wrong. This has been taking place since 48. And it is worth noting that took place and it was wrong. And there were people who knew it was wrong. Certainly Native Americans knew it was wrong. And there was a small number of white people who knew that it was wrong. Not enough. But we did not have international law yet that said it was wrong. Israel is committing this genocide in the wake of establishing international law that was supposed to be a guardrail against that. So the parallel is real, and yet it also is interesting that one genocide of settler colonialism unfolded in the 1800s, and another is unfolding in the last, since 48, after the establishment of what we thought and hoped would be international laws that would put a brake on genocide and have thoroughly failed us. And now unfolding where we can see the genocide on our cell phones. And so the parallels are there, but it matters when in history it takes place.
Yeah, certainly. Especially, you would think that we were supposed to have learned these lessons and digested them, and never again was supposed to mean never again for anybody, right? I hear that phrase sometimes.
That's exactly the issue. As a Jew, as a human being who believes, both as a Jew and a human being, that every human life is sacred, never again, I was raised by my parents to know that never again meant for everybody. Zionism, which is so corrupting of Judaism, because it is not interested in producing anything like a Jewish state informed by Jewish ethics. It is interested in creating a Jewish ethno-supremacist state. It has created a Jewish ethno-supremacist state. And the lesson it raises people with is never again for us Jews. And when you get into that mindset that some human lives are more than and other human lives are less than, that supports and fosters apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide.
So here we are, making valid criticisms, what I think are valid criticisms of the behavior of a nation state, right? Just like you were talking about America and white supremacy, and you can criticize the American government without being anti-American, At least I thought we had established that. And, similarly, you should be able to criticize the government of the state of Israel without it being an indictment of an entire people. But you've got the IHRA, that's International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, I believe. They adopted a definition of anti-Semitism, which includes, certain of criticisms of Israel as being anti-Semitic by definition.
Yep.
Critics
So
of this say it's used as a legal and institutional weapon to shut down legitimate dissent. I believe you've seen this up close. I was looking for a headshot of you to put on the graphic promoting this interview, and search Professor Daniel Segal. Some of the first stuff that comes up is, this radical left professor is teaching Jew hatred at Claremont College.
Yep. Well, and I have testified for the state legislature in Indiana against the adoption of the IRA bill. Let's say you want to shut down criticisms, not just of Netanyahu, but you want to shut down criticisms of an ethno-supremacist state, the Jewish ethno-supremacist state, the Zionist state, Israel. You stand up and you go anti-Semite because it intimidates people. This is a thoroughly dishonest, weaponized misuse, abuse of the charge of anti-Semitism. It is the sky is falling, and it's worse than the sky is falling, because it is saying that people who are standing up and demanding equal rights for everybody are somehow being hateful to Jewish Israelis. When I say that every law in Israel that treats Jews and non-Jews differently should be eliminated and they should have equal protection under the law, I'm not saying I hate the Jews. I hate the inequality. I hate the discrimination. But if you want to shut me down, go ahead and lie and say I'm a Jew hater. Say I am a self-hating Jew. But I do want to go back to saying something that I think being an anti-Zionist is more than just criticizing the government of Israel. It is a criticism of the state, because that supremacism is not just a policy of the Netanyahu government. It is like the supremacism that was present in this country when Black people could be denied their freedom, or when Black people could be relegated to second-class citizens, and even in the 1900s. It is like the racism of white apartheid South Africa. And let me say that any state that does not respect human equality is not a legitimate state, should not exist in that form. It either must adopt a commitment to human equality and freedom, or it must be brought out of its existence. So this is not just a criticism of the Netanyahu government. It is built into the Israeli state that it is a supremacist state, as much as it was built into the previous South African state. Now, in the case of South Africa, the state was brought down. In the case of the United States, the change came without bringing the state down. The state went through a series of reforms that must still continue. So the way we get there, whether it is by the kind of toppling of the state and replacing it, or by reforming it, that's not my focus. My focus is that until the state provides full equality and freedom for everybody under its jurisdiction, it does not have a right to exist. What does not have a right to exist is in any supremacist state. The Jewish supremacist state does not have a right to exist. The Zionist state does not have the right to exist. Israel in its current form does not have the right to exist. It could change, but it must change. It must embrace these radical ideas: equality, and freedom. Let me say them again. Equality and freedom. I know it's scary, but equality and freedom without treating Palestinians as exception. And until it does that, whatever state is in that region is an illegitimate state and does not have the right to exist.
And I do want to come back to that. I kind of want to close with, what that would look like, but we'll come back there. But right now, there is this very, very much a conflation. I think we talked about it of the Jewish people with the state of Israel. Even just a few years ago, it was President Biden said, and I want to say this is a direct quote. He says, "Where there is no Israel, there is no Jew safe in the world." And the Netanyahu government, especially, like you said, but and you can maybe tell me if this was cultivated over the course of the liberal and conservative Zionist governments alike since 1948, but of cultivating this idea that Jewish identity and the Israeli state are fused. But I guess to counter what President Biden said, if the Israeli state is a bad actor, doesn't that then actually endanger Jews worldwide, whether they're Zionists or not?
It does. Israel makes Jews unsafe. And I can talk about domestic policies of Biden's that I supported. He was a significantly pro-labor president. He knew that climate change was real, okay? But on foreign policy, he was an imperialist. And on Israel, he was horrible. I mean, let's go back to that terrible statement. Think about what it's telling us. Without Israel, Jews aren't safe. He's telling us I'm not safe in America. He's telling me that America's commitment to equality and freedom isn't going to make me safe. I mean, I think that shows a profound lack of respect for the best of it in America. And I will say it again. My safety is not in any way supported or increased by Israel existing as a supremacist, discriminatory, heavily armed, nuclear-armed state. The basis of my safety is it's bound up with our collective liberation. I am safest in a society where everybody has an opportunity to live a dignified life. We're in a society where everybody has an opportunity to live a dignified life, where everybody is free, where everybody is equal before the law, and there's an equality of opportunity. I mean, this is why, along with Jewish Voice for Peace, my other political home is the Democratic Socialists of America. We are safest through solidarity and collective liberation. And collective liberation where we have equal political rights, but we also have equal opportunities to live dignified lives. And when we have equal opportunities to live dignified lives, and where we have a built-up commons so that every child has health care, every child has an opportunity for an education, we know that what goes down overwhelmingly are crimes that are responses to oppression and inequality, desperation. And that's what creates safety. We create safety by creating opportunity and a shared life that is decent for all of us. When we treat people unequally and we deprive people, some of their responses are desperate. And that creates, that is the basis overwhelmingly of crime in capitalist societies. And it does not, make me safe. And the best protection for me as a Jew is, frankly, ensuring that all oppressed peoples have equality and freedom and an opportunity to live dignified lives.
you said, oppressed people will lash out. I think of Dr. King, who said that a riot is the language of the unheard, right? I
Right.
mean, you scale that, right, if
Right.
you will.
And Palestinian, not currently, but at some moments, Palestinian resistance is violent. At some moment, the resistance, and I will say, I've been in Palestine twice, and it is even when I was there in 18, in the spring of 23, it is a violently, viciously apartheid, discriminatory state. I would love to be an absolutist against violence. It is hard. It is hard. And it's not my place to say to people who are denied freedom, as people in Palestine are by the Israeli state, people who are denied equality, people who are denied opportunities for a dignified life. I certainly don't condone or encourage their violence, but I've never been denied my freedom. I've never been denied my equality in that way, or opportunities for a dignified life. So I don't say to that person, don't be violent in response. I try to support their struggle as best I can. But, I taught world history for 4 decades at the Claremont colleges. And part of world history is enslaved Black people on U.S. plantations rising up and sometimes killing their master and killing their family. I never once said that that was a good thing, the violence, or that I never once celebrated those deaths. But I can't say
where it comes from. Yeah.
But I can't say I condemn it either. I've not lived that life. And what I can say is, let us do everything we can to support people's struggle for freedom and equality without violence. And, when desperate people denied freedom and equality resort to violence, and again, this is a point King made, I don't focus my blame on them. I focus my blame on the conditions that denied them freedom and equality. And in this country, the people who have failed to support the Palestinian struggle. What have Palestinians asked of us through the BDS National Committee, which is a broad consensus of Palestinian society? They've asked us to engage in these nonviolent tactics: boycotts of Israeli products, divestment, so selling Israeli bonds, divesting from the companies that profit from the apartheid, from the ethnic cleansing, from the genocide in Israel, and sanctions, having the government place a sanction on the Israeli state and its leadership. These are nonviolent tactics. And if you, and I don't mean you, Scott, but I'm saying this to anybody listening, if you have not supported BDS, shame on you, because you created the desperate conditions that led people to the violence of October 7th. Those of us who supported the Palestinian call for BDS, the Palestinian, which is essentially a Palestinian picket line, don't buy Israeli goods, divest from Israeli companies, support sanctions, stop selling weapons of mass destruction to the Israeli state. Those were solidarity activities to support nonviolent struggles against the Israeli state. And not surprisingly, the failure to adopt those in a timely fashion meant that tragically, some Palestinians suffering in those ways lashed out violently. I don't approve of that violence. I don't celebrate it, but I also blame the oppression and blame the people who failed to support nonviolent resistance.
You talked about building a actual safe space for people was one where, we have a just and equal society. And that is a way to make oneself safe. And I think other folks would say, well, you keep yourself safe under threat of like nuclear arms. And you mentioned Israel being a nuclear armed country. I believe that's unofficial. To my understanding, they've never really acknowledged that they have a nuclear program, and it's sort of unofficial and was that knowledge and know-how for a nuclear program was obtained through spying, essentially, and on both the U.S. and the Soviet Union at the time. And I want to tread carefully here because I'm going to, get into like Mossad and, and talking about, again, a particular government's particular intelligence agency having deep tentacles around the world, without making broader speculation. And, and not just the spy agency. You think about financial ties, things like AIPAC is a big contentious issue with the Israel lobby funding Democratic primaries right now. And like, how do you talk about things like the special U.S.-Israel relationship, Israeli influence on U.S. politics, a wide spy network across the U.S. and Europe and Russia, without it sound like you're talking about a Jewish cabal running the world?
Well, a couple of things here. When we talk about Zionism, it claims to be Jewish, and it certainly has a significant number of Jewish U.S. supporters, though fewer and fewer. If you're talking about young Jews, and the polling now shows more young Jews, so young, the polls vary, under 30, under 40, more young Jews identify as anti-Zionist than Zionist. So there was a period of time in which the U.S. Jewish population was overwhelmingly Zionist. Never unanimous, but overwhelming. That was not true before 1967. Zionism was contested significantly throughout the middle of the 20th century. There's what we call the Bund tradition, a tradition of left Jewish socialism that abhorred Zionism and the Zionist state and believed, as I believe, that Jewish liberation is through collective liberation, through ending the kinds of obscene inequalities that we have in a capitalist society. And, there were very important Jewish Bund and Bund-related institutions in the United States, particularly in New York, in the first half of the century, and even after the founding of Israel. The strong, overwhelmingly consensus support of U.S. Jews for Zionism really gels after the 1967 war. It's never unanimous. I can talk about my own dissent and my dissent of people I know. It's very strongly in place until early in this century. So we're talking about a strong, overwhelmingly consensus of about 40 years, 35 years. In this century, more, and as I know, as somebody who taught at a college, more and more generations of younger Jews said, we are taught as Jews to have a commitment to human equality, that every life is sacred. We're taught as Jews to say we fight against social injustice. We're taught as Jews to say we must oppose genocide. And our teachers, our rabbis, and our parents act like they mean it and sound like they mean it when they're talking about all sorts of issues. But they sound like they are contradicting themselves, that they are engaged in abject hypocrisy because they endlessly support the oppression of Palestinians. And younger Jews have said, no, I am not going to accept the Palestinian exception to the best of my Jewish faith tradition. And so younger Jews have overwhelmingly, year after year, more and more rejecting Zionism. I've seen this as an activist organizing with Jewish Voice for Peace. When I joined Jewish Voice for Peace, Early in this century, we had membership in the hundreds. Our membership is now in the tens of thousands. And if you're talking about supporters, we're talking about over 750,000. We are no longer, atypical. And we've seen, the polling shows that Zoran Mandani, whose views about Israel are very close to mine, he says he does not think Israel should exist as a state that has laws that treat Jews as more than and Palestinians as less than. It has to reject those ethno-supremacist qualities to be a legitimate state, to have a basis of legitimacy in existing. What percentage of Jews in New York, the most Jewish city in this country? Well, it depends on which polls you read, but something like 30 to 40% of Jewish New Yorkers voted for Mandani. So that conflation, they've lost. Zionists want to tell you that all Jews support Zionism. Zionists want to tell you that if you're not with them, you must be an anti-Semite. But increasing number of young Jews are proudly Jewish and proudly anti-Zionist, and are also, very interestingly, rediscovering those left Bund traditions that I talked about. They are, for instance, very interested in studying Yiddish, which was the language of Jewish socialist internationalism, more than studying Hebrew, which has become the nationalist language of a supremacist state. So there's there's this dramatic shift. Biden didn't get it. He was a true believer in Zionism. It was terrible. It supported sending bomb after bomb to kill Palestinian after Palestinian. And let me tell you, I spent that convention that nominated Harris marching behind a police line, demanding that Harris allow a Palestinian voice on that stage.
Small ask.
Small ask. Hopefully asking her to recognize and stand against genocide and to support an end of sending those weapons of genocide. She refused. I don't applaud the election of Donald Trump, but I have to tell you, if you can't stand against genocide, you don't deserve anybody's vote. And she failed. And I think she came by her loss of that election as a result of her moral failure. And the current analysis that the DNC is hiding from us is that failing to oppose genocide cost her the election. Well, look, if you told me that voters abandoned her because she was a Black woman, I'd be furious. That's a terrible reason to abandon her. If you tell me voters abandoned her because they didn't think there was actually any exception to human rights, that voters abandoned her because they thought genocide was wrong, well, that's actually a good reason to abandon her. She earned that. And the Democrats had better learn that lesson. Genocide, pro-genocide, APEC Democrat and pro-genocide Democrat are synonyms. And we have...
go ahead. Sorry.
I can talk about particular congressional races. New York 10, where Dan Goldman, corporate hack, and never met a financial capital that he didn't want to deregulate and empower, and like his loyalty to the Jewish supremacist state is shameful. Running against him is Brad Lander, proudly Jewish, supported Mandani, and Brad Lander doesn't take a dime from AIPAC. Dan Goldman, I don't know how. I just saw the figure today. I can't remember it. So, there's a case where we have two very strongly Jewish identified candidates. One is an anti-AIPAC, anti-genocide candidate. Another is a AIPAC and pro-genocide candidate. And I obviously know where my loyalties fall on that.
So, Mike, this could be like it's such a deep topic, and like we're only scratching the surface here tonight. There's so much more I want to talk about, but we've got, I don't know, maybe 7 minutes or so before I've got to start my closing spiel. So I want to ask you, with that time we have left, like, what does a just resolution look like in Palestine?
Well,
how do these groups of people coexist together? Is it a two-state solution? Is it a one-state solution? From the river to the sea, what does that mean?
well, I will
So
say,
much to unpack. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So let me say this: from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and I say that proudly as a Jew. I also want to say, traveling in Palestine, I never felt any anti-Semitism or hostility to me as a Jew. I was welcomed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque by the head of the Mosque Association. He had seen a biography of me beforehand and knew I was Jewish. And he made a point that he was concerned I might feel I was not welcomed. And he said, I want you to understand, we do not want any Zionists here. Zionists are our colonists. They discriminate against us. They put these bullets into our mosque. They came in here and fired guns and killed people and pulled bullets into the mosque. You're an anti-Zionist. You are welcome. And I embrace you as a Jewish brother. That was in 18, I think. Yes, that was in 18 when I was in the West Bank. I went back in the spring of 23. I was invited to the home of a wonderful Palestinian couple, colleagues at Bezait University, and their children are running around happily like children do. And the parents are talking to me. What do they tell their children about why, when they go through a checkpoint, as they must if they leave the city, guns are pointed at them? And what they said to me is, we never tell our children that this is because the Jews hate us. We never tell our children that this is the fault of the Jews. This is the fault of the Zionists. This is the fault. Zionists are our colonists. And we raise our children to be anti-Zionist, anti-colonialist. Our kids, until they got up and ran away from the table like 5 and 8-year-olds do, they knew that you were here as our Jewish friend, and did they seem scared of you? No, so we've not raised them with anti-Semitism. We've raised them with anti-Zionism. I found greater clarity about that truth, that anti-Zionism is an embrace of radical love and collective liberation, universal human rights, and has nothing in common with anti-Semitism. I found greater clarity about that truth in Palestine and in Palestinian organizations in this country. In Palestine and in Palestinian organizations in this country, I've never experienced anti-Semitism. The conflation comes from Zionists who want to use it to shut down advocacy for freedom and equality. What does a just future look like? It has to be based on human rights first. Freedom and equality, the full menu of human and political rights for Palestinians, including the internationally guaranteed right of war refugees to return to their homes. And when there is freedom and equality, representatives of different communities can sit down and negotiate. If they want one state, that's fine. If they want 2 states, 1.5, 23, 0. I'm here. That's for the people there. It would be colonialist of me to impose a solution. The one thing I can say as a human being, because I think this transcends localities, is a just future has to be based on, I'll say it again, it's really scary, equality and freedom for everybody. And no state that denies people freedom and equality, as the Zionist state does, has a right to exist. Any state that denies people equality and freedom must change or cease to exist. So that's what a just future. It's based on rights. And I also believe if you are worried that there is understandably Palestinian, anger towards Jewish Israelis because of Zionism, nothing will overcome that other than giving Palestinians full equality and full freedom. And I do believe that when you give people full equality and full freedom, that you're inviting them into radical love. You're inviting them into a just peace. It may not happen instantly, but it's the only and best path we have.
Professor Segal, thank you so much for this. It's been enlightening to hear from you tonight, and like I said, there's so much more I'd love to ask. I want to pick your brain, but for right now, we got to start wrapping up. Where would you recommend folks go to learn more, to enlighten themselves on this incredibly deep topic?
Well, I think it's crucial. I appreciate being invited, and I think there's a role for me as a Jewish ally, but I also want people to listen and hear Palestinian voices. In terms of reading, nothing has superseded an essay by Edward Said, the great Palestinian theorist, called Zionism from the Standpoint of Its Victims. I think it's 1971. I can send you the citation. I don't know if you can make that available to people. My other sort of go-to book by a Palestinian is a book by Raja Shahada, who founded the great human rights organization, Al-Haq, who wrote a beautiful book called Palestinian Walks. There's also right now so many great Palestinian movies. I love Palestine 1936, which is about the way in which Zionism really began or took major steps to end the freedom and equality of Palestinians, not in 48, but back in 36. That's by Anne-Marie Jassy, who I happen to have had the privilege of meeting in Palestine, and just a wonderful human being, brilliant film. There's The Voice of Hind. There's, several films out. These are great movies by Palestinian filmmakers. The Voice of Hind is now streamable. At least in indie, Can Films, cinema shows some of these. Listen to Palestinians. Also go to the website of Jewish Voice for Peace, and go to the website of various Palestinian organizations such as the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights and the Adala Justice Project. So I think, I always love to get connected to the voices of people who are part of these oppressed societies. And again, Said, Raja Shahada, there's other authors as well, but I will just start with those two who I think are indispensable.
Very good stuff. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Would love to have you back and talk about this again sometime. But for now, Daniel Segal, thank you so much for joining the Who's Left podcast tonight.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
That was Professor Daniel Segal, Professor Emeritus from Pitzer College out in California, living here in Bloomington now, an activist with Jewish Voice for Peace. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Come back Sunday. I'll be live at 10:30 a.m. with Who's Left This Week, Indiana's only Sunday morning political news show by and for progressives. Thank you once again for your kind support over at progressiveindiana.net. Could really use a subscription. Could also use a follow on social media at Progressive Indiana Network on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at the same handle. You can also follow us on Blue Sky and TikTok at PIN Indiana. You can find me at Who's Left on most of your social media sites. That's HOOS Left. You can direct message me any of there with feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns, or you can email me directly at scott@whosleft.us. Finally, forward the show to a friend and have them pass it on. Let's keep building this project and a truly democratic state, one conversation at a time. Until the next one, this has been the Who's Left Podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.